Good morning.
Morning.
I'm Richard Dawkins, and I'd love to talk to you about any problems you might have teaching evolution. Do you get problems with teaching evolution?
Yeah. It's a difficult concept to get their heads around because the numbers are so vast. You're talking the scale of time is so
The sheer
enormous.
time scale.
Yeah.
That's obviously a difficulty.
Yeah.
Do you encounter kind of resistance to it, though, coming from the home background or anything like that?
From some students.
Yeah, from some students.
What sort of questions do they ask?
To be honest, microevolution, when we do about resistance of bacteria and warfarin resistance, there's never really any issue with teaching of that. But when it becomes macroevolution, when it becomes specifically related to human evolution, that's when you...
And do you try to explain to them that macroevolution is just microevolution stacked up over a very long time?
Yeah.
So that comes back to your
then it
point
comes back
about
to-
Of course,
the
yeah.
huge lengths of time.
Yes, they also have
involved.
problems sometimes understanding fossil formation. So when we talk about the fossil record and the evidence for evolution stepwise through the fossil record, sometimes they difficulty grasping that because the formation of fossils there's a lot of misconceptions around fossil
Oh,
formation.
really?
Yeah.
What sort of misconceptions do you get?
Students often think they're actually remains of living
Okay,
tissues.
yes. Well, you can explain that, can't you?
Yeah.
Yes. But the sheer age is a problem. You were saying. What about human evolution? Does that give particular difficulties?
It
Yeah.
does give particular problems, doesn't
Yeah.
it? I mean, simply, some kids just won't accept it. That they're brought up in families where they just don't believe it, and that's an end to it. There's no lack of understanding of it necessarily. It's just,
Okay. So, are they prepared to believe that kangaroos and camels have evolved, but just not humans?
Nothing.
Nothing.
That's right.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it is creationism, if you like, is what they believe.
What about the age of the Earth? Do they think that the Earth is young? They think the Earth is only thousands of years old?
To be honest, I don't get that resistance when we're doing rock cycle or we talk about deep time and James Hutton and processes to do with rocks. There's not much resistance for that. It's specifically living
and
things.
to be honest with the timescales anyway, I'm not sure that to them there's much difference between thousands of years old and billions of years old.
No.
Can I offer you a helpful analogy for that?
Yeah.
If you believe that the world is only 6,000 years old, as compared to the true age, which is, as you know, 4.6 billion years, that's equivalent to believing that the width of North America from New York to San Francisco is 7.8 yards. That'll give them an idea of the sheer scale of the error
Yeah.
that they've been brought up to believe. They may still believe it, but at least they should know what the difference is between thousands of years and thousands of millions of years.
We do some lovely activities on sizes of numbers. For instance, if you take a standard graph paper, it's 16.5 A4 sheets of standard graph paper. There are 1 million tiny squares. And when we're talking about the universe, we talk about scale in terms of the diameter of the Earth and the distance from the Earth to the Sun, and then take that to the width of the Milky Way, and the numbers become astronomical.
Yeah.
So they do get a sense
Great.
of numbers.
Great.
But it's just applying the little steps that that people have recorded evolution
Yes.
to the enormous scale and complexity of a human is a difficult one.
And I get as well, lots of my kids don't realise that evolution is so branched. I think they see it as completely linear from ape to human. That
Okay.
it's just
So
one
do
path.
they think you're trying to tell them that modern chimpanzees are our ancestors? or
Exactly.
what? Yes.
The
Very
really
much
common
so.
question is
Yeah.
why they're still
Why they're still-
chimpanzees
Yeah.
because they don't
Yeah.
understand that the
But
branching
again,
completely.
it must feel good when you tell them that. I mean, when you explain it to them, or do they still not get it?
They find it difficult, don't
Yeah.
they? They find it difficult to imagine something that isn't like what we see today. So they see what we see today and they cannot go back to think of it when it was very different.
Right. But they know about dinosaurs. I mean, they know there was a time when
Yeah.
mammals were very small and
Yeah.
insignificant, and so doesn't that get it through to them?
It's difficult though because we don't talk about the evolution of the dinosaurs. So you can, if you want, as a pupil in the classroom, just completely ignore that aspect of it, and dinosaurs were there and then an asteroid hit and then they weren't, and you don't have to if you don't actually engage with it. You don't have to understand it any further than that, really.
But then they don't
For
even
a lot of
really
kids.
understand dinosaurs. The fact that certain species of dinosaurs didn't exist on the planet at the same time.
Yeah.
In their heads, they were all there at the same time.
Okay.
And then bang, and they were gone. That's how they see dinosaurs on the planet. Which, you know, if they don't really understand that completely.
But again, it must be rather fun explaining that to them. I mean, clearly you've identified what the misconceptions are. And so you've got a task ahead of you, but it's surely a solvable one.
Some issues with time scale, I think. I mean, evolution forms a relatively small part of a whole wide series of things that you're teaching them. And sort of you could spend a lot of time making sure they understood it really well.
I see.
But it's an area with more resistance than you find in some areas.
For some people, truth isn't something you're going to find in science. It's they take a narrative which they've grown up with. It's come through their family and their culture, and that narrative explains what they need to know about the origin of life and etc. We can present.
Sorry, could you start talking about that again? Because we missed the beginning of that.
Oh right, okay.
That's really interesting.
God, what was I saying?
Truth.
Oh right, yeah. For some students, truth isn't something they see coming through science, even though our emphasis is on ideas and evidence to support these ideas. A lot of students have a religious narrative that's very important to them. It's an important part of their life through their family and their culture, and they see a conflict in holding on to that and taking truth to be a scientific part of the sphere of science.
It's interesting that they recognise that there is a conflict, and you're saying that when there is a conflict, they resolve it by saying that their family religious tradition is the right one, and what they're taught in science class is the wrong one.
In my experience, I have seen that. I have seen children and students in that position, yeah.
And if you then say, but look, here's the evidence, which part of the evidence don't you...
But you can interpret a narrative, can't you? You don't have to take a narrative as literal. Some students can marry the two. I find more unusual to find a student that's able to accept the scientific principles of idea and evidence and take this idea, and yes, this idea could be part of the picture, part of the story, and manage to hold on to their belief system as well.
But then suppose you took an analogy with human affairs, like a court case, who did a murder or something, and you said, well, suppose that the police found this evidence and that evidence, there are fingerprints and there are footprints, and this is all evidence. Could you really say that a narrative somehow trumps that?
But Hindu mythology talks about the oceans being churned and life coming from the oceans, and isn't there some link there with the evolutionary story of life and how life began? So it's how things are interpreted. It's not a literal.
I don't see that we can expect to convince them just by showing them the evidence.
Really? Why not?
Well, because they've got other evidence which they've been brought up with throughout their lives.
But that's not evidence.
No, to them it's evidence, though, isn't it?
And to their parents, for someone who has been brought up with something being a historical record in their view, well, that would have as much weight, wouldn't it, as our historical record with the fossil evidence for them. So I completely agree. Just showing them the evidence in a classroom is not going to shake that foundation that they already have.
The best we can hope to do is to get them thinking about it and get them considering the evidence. Yeah, and some we might convince there and then, but we can't expect to say, here's the evidence, right, that's it, now you understand evolution, and everything you've thought before was wrong. It's just not going to happen that way.
How they understand the evidence. I mean, we've already said that they have trouble with things like fossils. So you say, well, there is this fossil record and this is what it shows us. But if the students don't really understand that, but they do understand this very neat little timeline that seems to make much more sense to them, then obviously they're going to pick the one that they think they understand over the one which is slightly new, and they're not sure they really understand the concepts, and they're not 100% sure they understand what that's actually showing you. And they know that the teacher's told them and tried to show them, but they've been shown, every day of their lives, this nice narrative that
well, suppose you said to them, where do you think that nice narrative comes from? I mean, it's a few thousand years old at most, and it was made up by people who lived at that time. Why on earth do you trust that more than the evidence of fossils,
Because you
radioactive dating?
But you have to be very careful, because we're talking about something very fundamental here. We're talking about young people, we're talking about identity. And identity, when you're young, it's about family, it's about the milieu you exist in. It's not our place to fly the banner of science and say there's no room for anything else. All we can do is present science. This is a way of thinking. This is science has given us so much. This is one way of interpreting life. We believe this is
interpreting.
We believe this is the way because we are scientists, but it's not my place to tell you that you're wrong.
We believe it because we're scientists. Do you really mean that, or do you mean we believe it because the evidence is there in the rocks?
Well, that's what I'm saying. That's
yes,
why, because
yeah.
I'm a scientist, and that's the way I view
No,
the
it's
world.
not because you're a scientist, is it? I mean, it's there. The evidence is there. Their evidence is not there. It's just made up.
Well, we see that as evidence because we're scientists.
No.
What I'm saying is that non-scientists wouldn't necessarily see that as evidence.
This is rampant relativism you're talking now, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yes.
Well,
okay.
That's the world we're in.
Yes.
One thing, following on from what Chris was saying, we can't get into the business of knocking down kids' religions and the religions of families.
Why not, actually?
Why not? Because
because we teach science, and what I mean by that is we allow kids access to science and we allow them to understand science.
Yes.
But I would not feel comfortable talking about anything but science. So if I present the scientific case and I make sure they understand the scientific case, I think I've done my job.
Yeah, yes.
And I think if they understand it, that's what I wanted at the beginning of the lesson, them to understand it. But their acceptance of it is a separate issue. I think that's what we've been talking about.
Well, you were saying just now that evolution obviously is only a small part of the biology curriculum. Do you get any trouble from anything else? I mean, do you get any trouble when you're teaching cell structure, when you're teaching biochemistry, when you're teaching ecology?
I mean, there are misconceptions and problems with understanding across the entire range of science. I mean, some of these things are really difficult if you can't see them. You know, when you look at a human being, you can't see the cells straight away. It's not always obvious to the children in the same way that it wasn't obvious to scientists, first of all.
Yeah.
If it was obvious, we wouldn't have to teach it in the way that we do.
But then you get them to look down a microscope and
then they see it.
Richard, great.
Just going on from what we were saying about belief systems, I'm more than happy to stand up in front of a class or tell a child that for me, God, truth is the scientific method, is evidence and ideas, and that we live in a random universe, and that's my understanding of life. And if I tool them up such that one day, you know, perhaps they'll come to the same realization, that's all I can possibly hope for. But I don't want to knock them down. I don't want to say, you know, that, you know, I can't.
No. I mean, I totally agree. You don't want to, from your position of authority, just say you're wrong. I mean, you certainly don't want to do that. But I'm still a bit baffled by why, when you actually present the evidence, when you say, here is a fossil and here is radioactive dating that shows that this fossil is 100 million years old, or whatever it might be, and then pile up lots of other evidence, and then say, well, if you prefer your cosmic butter churn thing, where's the evidence for that? I mean, let's look at the evidence for that. Where does it come from? Where does the cosmic butter churn, or Genesis, or whatever the particular myth that they believe, where does that come from? And go back in the archaeology, go back in the history, and say, well, which of those two sets of evidence stacks up? Mightn't they get it then?
Well, they might, but then we're not in the business of deconstructing their religion.
Well, let's not put it that way. Let's just say, here's the evidence for the cosmic butter churn, here's the evidence for Adam and Eve, here's the evidence for the fossils. Take your pick.
I mean, we could do that, but for pragmatic reasons, we don't.
You don't do that now?
For the obvious reasons.
Well, do we or don't we? And I'm not sure, because the curriculum is compartmentalised, isn't it? So, I mean, the same students we're working with will have sessions where they're discussing specifically philosophy and ethics, and they may well, in those sessions, go into the creation myths.
I mean,
they actually do, don't they? The philosophy and ethics course will do. I mean, our kids have done a lesson looking at the scientific basis for the origin of the universe, compared to the different major religions, and looking at similarities between them, differences between them, which ones are more kind of making sense.
Yes.
But that, for me, is a philosophy lesson.
Yeah.
That's not a science lesson.
Okay. Do they argue with each other? I mean, those who favour the cosmic butter churn and those who favour Adam and Eve, do they argue with each other about that?
I've not heard any arguments like that, I must say.
It doesn't occur to them
No.
that their different
No.
myths are incompatible with each other?
No. The
No.
funniest thing a kid ever said to me was when I told them that I'd been brought up a Catholic but I no longer had a faith was, what does your mum think? What does
Well, I think that's very perceptive. And that's probably pretty much the problem. I believe you've had sort of various communications from creationist organisations in intelligent design and things like that. Do you feel you're kind of being supplied with materials by organisations trying to influence the way you teach?
Of course, they're trying to influence.
Yeah.
They wouldn't be sending it if they weren't trying to.
Yeah. So what have you received? What have they sent?
We received last year a Truth in Science DVD that we talked about as a department.
Truth in Science.
Truth in
A
Science.
nice
It was-
oxymoronic.
It was a 6-part lesson, the first part of which I would actually use some parts of it because it's set in a background for evolution and it is the science behind Darwinism, natural selection, etc. But then the next 5 parts of it are undermining natural selection and evolution by natural selection by only interviewing scientists such as, is it Michael Behe, is that his name? The guy who coined the intelligent design phrase. And then it becomes, after the first lesson, it becomes very, very one-sided and very, very much the emphasis is intelligent design.
Yes.
Have the others also seen the DVD?
I've not seen that one, no.
No. We had a discussion where we said as a department we wouldn't use it, so most people, I would imagine, haven't.
But I think there's just so much more stuff out there about the whole intelligent design thing. It's just in the media and all around us, increasingly so. I mean, I've not heard any kids use the phrase intelligent design, but you just see so much more about it everywhere you look these days.
Yes.
But then a lot of kids don't know the word intelligent design, but when talking to them, that is what they think, that's how they've married the two.
I don't believe in intelligent design. I don't believe in it, but I can see where it's come from.
Yeah.
Because it very neatly jumps in and fills that the misconception, the faith gap, if you like, the bit the kids have difficulty with, which is the timescale and the complexity.
Yes.
And this very simple process, but the timescale and the complexity, and it jumps in there. And
mind you, most of the people who talk about intelligent design actually do believe in an old Earth. They do distance themselves from naive young Earth creationism. Do you think it's possible to actually inspire the children with the excitement of the fact that evolution does explain so much? I mean, rather than to just treat it as something which they've got to learn because it's in the syllabus, actually say it's really immensely exciting that you can really explain the complexity of life, the grace of a swallow's wing, of a dolphin's fin, etc., by this extraordinarily powerful theory. Do you think that might grab at least some of them?
But you get a lot. I've talked to my kids about tarsiers because I think they're absolutely amazing. Tarsiers' big eyes and the history of tarsiers being able to see in the dark and then not, and then growing those massive eyes. And yeah, if you take individual cases, you can excite them, but it's still relating that to every species and specifically relating it to humans.
And you emphasise that they probably had an ancestor that was a bit like a tarsier, but it wasn't a tarsier, and that modern tarsiers are descended from that ancestor during exactly the same length of time as we are descended from that ancestor. Yes.
But then you do get a lot of kind of, well, we're obviously the best, aren't we? Because we're the most intelligent. So if everyone else has had the same kind of time, why aren't they all intelligent as well?
you get a lot of planet, though, aren't we?
But you get a lot of kind of questions like that.
They do see it as getting better, don't they?
Yeah.
As rather than just getting better suited to what's there.
Yes.
The kids do see it as getting better.
Well, perhaps you could give them a little lesson from the point of view of, say, a swift, which is matchless in the air, and a swift looks down on us and says, look at those clumsy, lumbering creatures down there. All they can do is jump a few feet into the air. Look at us. I mean, or look at a bat whizzing through the air in pitch darkness. a bat's eye view would see humans as blundering idiots, bumping into things in the middle of the night. Do you think you'll get somewhere like that?
Well, I think you're going to inspire some, and there'll be some who will take the ideas and run with them, and you know, it will be an eye-opening sort of event. But it isn't going to happen for all of them, you know, because the concepts are A, very difficult, and B, as far as they're concerned, counterintuitive, you know, based on what they've been brought up with. And so you can't. We've got to be realistic. We've got to do what we can. You know, otherwise we can spend the entire 4 years they're here just on evolution and still not reach all of them.
Yes.
You know, we've got a lot of other things to do as well.
Indeed. Does evolution come early or late in the biology syllabus?
Because of the difficulty with it, it comes quite late, doesn't it?
It comes quite late because it also assumes a lot of other knowledge, because you talk about, you know, mutation and competition and so it comes quite late on. Because
I can see why that is, but I can also see it, in a way it's a little bit odd, because it means they're learning a lot of the detail of how the body is and what lungs and hearts and cells and things, and yet with no idea of what it's all for, what it's all about. And in some ways, maybe you should start with evolution, give a kind of rationale.
We're now getting on to problems of the science curriculum in general, aren't we? Where it has been very piecemeal, traditionally.
Yeah.
We do talk a lot about the majesty, the magic of structure and function, and how the two marry so beautifully right across life, the whole breadth of life. So we do. There is that sense of wonder starts to come.
Do you teach
through.
them about Darwin himself? I mean, does that come into?
They'll know all about the journey of the beagle, and they'll know all the processes. And he's quite a good model of. He's quite a good model when you're talking about good scientists observing and drawing conclusions from observations. So you use him as an example of a good scientist as well.
In our conversation, we've been talking about the problems you face, but what sort of percentage of the children give you these problems?
I think it's difficult to put a number on it, isn't it?
Yeah.
I would say it's a relatively small percentage that walk out the classroom convinced.
Walk out?
That walk out, that leave the classroom at the end, convinced by the evolution of our.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Relatively few that walk out convinced of evolution.
Yeah.
But there are some that probably wouldn't tell you, aren't there? There are some that will sit and nod and leave the classroom exactly as they came in, maybe with a bit more knowledge, but thinking the same way that they did when they came in.
And has anything changed recently? I mean, has it always been the same, or are things getting better or worse from this point of view?
There are a lot more multimedia tools that you can use to try and illustrate the abstract. So in that way, it's easier. There's a lot more resources on film and things like that. So that's getting easier. I don't think there's any change in the degree of resistance to the idea. I think a lot of the children, I'd say the majority of the children, probably do understand the concept. There are issues about explaining it on a piece of paper, given some diagrams of the fossil record of hippocampus or something like that.
When you talk about resources, are there any resources you'd really like to have and don't have that one could think about trying to supply?
I was talking to you about this earlier, but a lot of resources that we have for evolution concentrate on peppered moths, antibiotic resistance, and they're very, very, very short time scale, because
short time scale. So you want something to do with long time scales.
Absolutely.
Tens of millions of years, hundreds of millions of years.
And if I was actually picking a resource that I wish I had, it would be something specific to humans.
Yes. Are you talking film strips, books, booklets? What sort of things are we talking here?
Something you can talk them through. So a lot of animations and
animation, film strips. Yes. What about kind of PowerPoint slides? Do you use them?
To some extent, although we try to avoid
death by PowerPoint.
The worst thing you can do is have a PowerPoint and just talk through the text that's written on it. Visuals, things that change pretty rapidly, because that's the nature of the way TV programs are edited, isn't it?
Yes. Is it something you dread when you're coming on to teaching evolution, or do you look forward to it at the end of the biology curriculum?
I look forward to it.
I like it.
Because
it is so interesting, isn't it? So fascinating.
And if there's ever going to be a lesson that's going to get all the kids asking questions and questioning and getting involved,
I enjoy the frisson, the fact that it is contentious to some extent. So I do actually enjoy that. because it's alive, isn't it? It's an alive issue to talk about. Kids get animated.
Yeah, and in those lessons you get the most light bulb moments with kids. So when
That's a nice phrase, light bulb moment.
When you explain it and you see that kind of click and
Yes.
that makes sense.
Yes.
And that's always really, really nice. That's what you want in a lesson anyway.
Well, I gather I'm going to meet a group of them this morning, so I look forward to that.
Yeah.
Hopefully there'll be lots of light bulb moments.
Rachel, you were saying you received something from Truth in Science. How did that come about?
They sent a copy of a DVD with a 6-part lesson to every school in Britain, I think. So that came through the post last year. And it's divided into a 6-part lesson, and it's purported to teach the controversy behind evolution, when in reality 1 lesson deals with evolution and then 5 lessons are spent undermining the theory of natural selection.
There must have been a fair bit of money behind that. If they sent it to every school in Britain, did you say?
That's what the literature that came out with it said. And there's a website as well there's instructions on there and directions to that. So it looks like quite a big organisation.
There's a lot of money behind that, isn't there?
I would imagine so. I don't know.
I wonder where that comes from and whether it's tax-free.
Richard, can you answer what...
What do you think about receiving that sort of information from those organisations? I mean, does it annoy you? Are you pleased to receive it?
I think it's okay. I think the door has to be open for organisations, if they choose to send schools that kind of
And
information.
then it's up to you whether you use it.
Because I think otherwise, you can shut the door on a lot of things and it close schools off in a way.
Exactly, yes.
But I think that schools do have to be very careful about what they then use.
Mm-hmm.
I think there has to then be a bit of discussion in department, and I think departments have to be come to an agreement as to what's going to be used and what's not.
So you have a policy that you sit down together and discuss.
Well, that's what happened last year, wasn't it?
Yes. Does it bother you? It sort of bothers me that there's a lot of money behind it, and I suspect it may even be tax-free. I mean, do you sort of feel suspicious if you feel that this has been backed by some well-financed organisation?
Yeah, you've got to be sceptical about it. I mean, for example, we get information about the nuclear industry and nuclear power, and they're telling us how good nuclear power is now.
Yeah.
Obviously, there are arguments either way on that one.
Yes.
You can't just take everything that's sent our way at face
So
value.
you're suspicious of lobbies, really? That are,
Yeah. I mean, we know we're being lobbied.
Yes.
You've just got to be
Yeah.
sensible
And it
enough
doesn't
to...
mean that you can't use that.
No.
You use it knowing where it's come from.
And that's our job, isn't it? We're trying to train people to weigh the evidence and come up with an informed opinion. And so if somebody gives us something that we can use and analyse in that way, then it's an opportunity for students to weigh the evidence. And
As far as teaching the kids is concerned as well, something that's very much in the new science curriculum is about looking at the evidence, and not just what the evidence is, but where it comes from and who's producing the evidence. And how reliable is it because of that? So
I've got. I did the Royal Institution Christmas lectures for children about 15 years ago, and I've now got those on DVD. If I could raise the money to send that to all schools, I take it you'd all have your little staff meeting to decide whether to use it. Do you think that schools would use it if I did that?
Absolutely.
Sure they would.
Of course they would. Absolutely.